it was not just a process of identifying symptoms and signs, but it was like also overcoming a little bit of denial that we didn't want to be in this situation in the first place, and wanted to shrug it off as, just being overtired from the new childcare. That was, I guess, one of the biggest leaps, was saying, actually, something is wrong. Things aren't going as they should be, and we need help. That was like a big leap, but it was a really important one to take. And I think it was even a bigger leap when it was not just postpartum depression, but actually, like, Lisa may have some signs of psychosis, like actually accepting that and seeing the bullet points on websites that kind of describe different symptoms and say, like, oh no, we would never, have to deal with that. And then all of a sudden acknowledging that actually this could be going on and we need to take action, because it can be really dangerous for the mother and the children and the whole family. And so
that is David Abramson. David is husband to Lisa Abramson, who came on the show last week to share her experience with postpartum psychosis. This week, I wanted to get David's perspective on this difficult time in their life as they started their parenting journey. He shares the changes he saw in Lisa, how hard it was to try and find help, and how easy it was to dismiss symptoms at the start by using sleep deprivation as an ongoing excuse. We also chat about what was different for them as a family as they prepared for their second child. David shares all the safeguards they had in place and the help they had lined up well before baby number 2 entered the world. Welcome to the This Is Parenting podcast, a show devoted to sharing the roller coaster journey of parenthood from moms and dads all over the world. I'm your host, Andrea Rhodes. Information and show notes about today's episode can be found at thisisparentingpodcast.com. Let's get started. Why don't you kind of start from your perspective? Baby is here and you're really excited. And when did you kind of start to notice that something wasn't quite the way you thought it was supposed to be?
Yeah, so this was all, I guess, almost exactly 5 years ago, because our daughter just turned 5. And, the first 2 weeks were just and tons of adrenaline, and we're just so overjoyed to have a new baby. And then I went back to work the start of week 3. That's when we kind of became a little bit exhausted from the cumulative periods of staying awake. We had this kind of continuous breastfeeding cycle, and we both started to get quite just taxed from having the new baby. And I could really tell Lisa was beginning to struggle when she became kind of teary a lot of times, even, situations where you would not normally kind of cry. She became really upset by different things that were happening in the home, or things happening with her friends, and just having difficulty kind of coping with our new situation. And I think around week 3 or 4, where I started to go search for a therapist or a psychiatrist that might be able to help Lisa talk through some of the things she was going through, because it became clear that it wasn't just a mild case of baby blues. She seemed to be getting really depressed and really getting down on herself, and expressing that she was having difficulty just keeping up with our new pattern of living. And so I started to ask some friends. There's no kind of magic directory to find the right sort of person to get help in that situation. So I sort of networked with friends and was looking online on Yelp just to find any kind of person that has had experience working with new moms. And that was really challenging, just to find somebody that was a specialist and available. And by the time we actually found somebody, we were probably way too late, because I think around the beginning of February, Lisa really started to go from just being upset to starting to get a little bit more confused. She had a harder time kind of understanding what was going on. And, at first I chalked that up to just sleep deprivation, which we were both going through. But then it became clear that, there were times where she wouldn't necessarily understand the nuance of what I was saying. Like, didn't really kind of understand sarcasm or some other more subtleties to what we were talking about. And it became clear that, like, she was really kind of losing a little bit of her normal edge, and kind of progressively got worse and worse. She also started to get really agitated by things going on, and kind of worrying that things were, a lot worse than they were, worrying about being in trouble for things that were clearly just weren't there. And at a certain point, we're like, well, what she's talking about and what she's perceiving is kind of, there's a separation between that and reality. And that's when became really concerned that it was even worse than postpartum depression. She probably shared this in her own story, but that morning when it all kind of culminated, she had gone to spin class. I guess it was an environment with just sound and pressure and just probably overstimulation. And she came back in tears and just confused and kind of completely beside herself. And that was the same morning that she also had her first appointment with the doctor that we were finally able to arrange. And the doctor kind of knew right away that something wasn't right, although the doctor thought it was very severe postpartum depression that she was going through, which I guess was true, but the doctor wasn't able to initially detect the psychosis that had started to creep in. And it got to the point where Lisa started telling herself these stories about, being really in trouble. But then, a nanny was getting, the blame for it. And she basically expressed all these feelings of guilt that somebody was being accused of a crime that she actually had committed, but actually there was no crime. Nothing actually had happened, but she kind of started telling herself all these stories. And, I think as we interpreted it later, maybe, she was feeling guilty about kind of not feeling like she was being the mom that she wanted to be. And she was kind of creating all these stories and metaphors potentially for that difficult experience that she was going through. And that feeling of inadequacy, she was kind of turning it into something that was overly dramatized. But she essentially, as she probably told you in her story, she was feeling like she was so guilty about this fabricated situation that she was wanting to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. And those words were enough to convince, her mother and myself and the family members, as well as when we were talking on the phone to the doctor, that we needed to kind of get her really immediate attention. So that's when we brought her to the ER, and we had to do it under the premise that we were bringing her to the police station, because that was the only way to get her to kind of come along. We were saying, okay, like if you think you're in trouble, we'll bring you to the police station. But it actually was the ER. And from the ER, there's a process for bringing her and checking her into the psychiatric wing of the hospital. And that's where she spent the next 10 days to kind of stabilize and get all the medication that would kind of bring her back into reality, help her begin the process of recovery.
So take me back to the beginning of this process when you started to seek help, because I find that I commend you for doing that. And I think many partners and husbands don't see those signs necessarily like culminating into something that you need to look into, or they don't know how to approach it. So tell me a little bit about how you decided. You said you networked a little bit with friends and you were kind of Google searching. What did your friends in your peer circle say when you approached them with this somewhat personal and sensitive topic?
So what I guess I did at first was I started to confidentially share with a few friends that Lisa was crying about a particular situation, and basically confirming with the friends, like, I don't think this doesn't sound like Lisa. This doesn't seem like Lisa's normal way of reacting to situations. And the friends validated, yeah, it seems like she needs help. Something is wrong. And so I kind of got that from our own support network, a little bit of validation, because I didn't 100% know whether it was something that we needed help for. And it was a little bit difficult to broach the topic with her friends, but her friends had some of them had recently become moms themselves and had known some people in the situation before. So it seemed like it was the best way to start to get some other information. And some of the friends had, through their own personal networks, and they knew of some psychiatrists to talk to. But it almost felt like we were way behind the ball. And like, if we were already in that situation, should have really had those conversations even earlier to get her help, because it's not like you can just like show up the next day in some kind of urgent care for psychiatric help. Oftentimes you have to wait a long time to get on anybody's calendar. And we needed like help like yesterday. Yeah, it's actually like kind of knowing that we were in that situation. It was not just a process of identifying symptoms and signs, but it was like also overcoming a little bit of denial that we didn't want to be in this situation in the first place, and we wanted to shrug it off as, just being overtired from the new childcare, that was, I guess, one of the biggest leaps, was saying actually something is wrong. Things aren't going as they should be, and we need help. That was like a big leap, but it was a really important one to take. And I think it was even a bigger leap when it was not just postpartum depression, but actually like Lisa may have some signs of psychosis, like actually accepting that and seeing the bullet points on websites that kind of describe different symptoms and say like, oh no, we would never, have to deal with that. And then all of a sudden acknowledging that actually this could be going on and we need to take action because it can be really dangerous for the mother and children and the whole family. And so going from like suspicion to acceptance is it's a difficult process in the midst of like having a screaming baby and everything else going on in your life.
Yeah, that's something that we kind of gloss over, is not only are you dealing with something that's right in front of you like that could spin out of control quickly, but then you're also dealing with a newborn. That's its own set of tasks and nonstop care. So that just kind of elevates what is in front of you in terms of trying to take care of your wife and your baby.
Yeah, it's not the ideal setting for kind of advanced problem solving and interpersonal reflection and everything else. It's like it's already a chaotic situation, and then you don't have your full capacity yourself. With not getting much sleep and all the emotional roller coasters that are going on. So yeah, that probably greatly exacerbates the situation.
And you guys recently had another child, right?
We did, yeah. It's now been about a year and a half, but we had our second daughter, Vivi, in the middle of 2017, and that was quite a different situation. Like going in eyes wide open, knowing what to look for, creating a lot of safeguards, and just putting things in place to protect Lisa's sleep, to protect Lisa's ability to take care of herself. By putting a lot of those things into place, I think we minimize the risk of it all happening again. Supposedly it's kind of a 50-50 chance whether it'll happen for the second child. It was a risk that we wanted to take because we wanted to have a larger family. All the difficulties with the first birth, having Lucy was still a wonderful gift, and also oddly kind of a opportunity for transformation and growth for Lisa and me. And so we felt confident enough that we would take the chances for the second time around, and we were lucky that for us it was a lot easier the second time.
So tell me more about those safeguards that you put into place, because I think that's something that listeners are really going to be interested in, because you've been on the bad side of it, as bad as it can get, and you've kind of seen it all. So you talked about putting some safeguards in place for that second child. What exactly did you do? What was that plan that you had ahead of time that kind of helped get you down the right path?
So for us, arranging for the appropriate amount of support and help on a 24-hour basis was really critical. We knew that the first time when Lisa, went through so much, a lot of it may have stemmed from not getting enough sleep and becoming overexhausted. And so we made sure we had sufficient childcare for our first child, and not just having kind of grandparents in the background with their own schedules and complexities to help to have to manage, but having a nanny there, and then also having nighttime help. I know it's really challenging for a lot of families to be able to have, but to be able to have that security that you're going to get a good night's sleep at least a couple nights a week, if not every night a week, that can be a game changer in terms of like reducing the anxiety and the worry that you're never going to get a break. Sleep out of the equation and make sure that Lisa was going to be able to get her rest. The other major thing that we learned from the first time around was that there's so much stress and pressure about breastfeeding and helping the new baby gain weight. That was a major stressor, I think, was the worry that we weren't feeding Lucy. And we never really kind of heard the option of supplementing with formula. And in retrospect, it was really dumb to not just give her a couple extra meals. And it was not going to, dramatically change her biology or her IQ or anything else if she had a couple extra bottles of formula. And ultimately, we ended up having to go completely to formula because of Lisa being, pulled to the sidelines for a few weeks. So the second time around, we didn't even think twice about introducing formula. Breastfeeding was a lot easier with our second, which often happens. But we brought in formula whenever it just wasn't even convenient to breastfeed, and that totally removed that stress out of the situation. And I guess the third major accommodation or allowance that we made was just making sure Lisa had tons of therapeutic support too. So she just met more regularly with her therapist and just kind of had that extra level of backup. And between those three things, that made a really big difference. I can't say that it was like a complete walk in the park, and it's not like we didn't have some bumps along the way, but it wasn't anything like what we had before. I feel like we came into the situation just 100 times more prepared. I don't know if that's possible to completely recreate if it's your first child, but I think hearing other people's experiences, I think you can put some of those resources in place beforehand if you are concerned that this might be something you might go through based on your own history or just the probability that 1 in 7 women will have some sort of postpartum issue. I mean, I think there's a lot that you can kind of set in place beforehand and just be ready for it, and then you don't have to scramble if worst case situation you need it.
Thank you to David Abramson for coming on to share his experience. This episode wraps up the series of shows that was solely focused on this topic, but as you will hear with the majority of my guests, postpartum complications make a huge impact to those first few months, even years, in a woman's life as a mom. As a reminder, 1 in 7 women will be impacted by some form of postpartum mood disorders. I wish I had been more educated on how widespread this issue is, and more importantly, how different it looks for each and every mom. Share what you've learned, what you've heard in these episodes. Make this topic more normalized in how we talk about postpartum care. Everyone wins when moms are properly taken care of.